In my very first lecture of the course, way back at the beginning, I told you our discussions would be mainly theological and philosophical in nature, rather than psychological or sociological or historical. And I said we'd be raising some of the big questions of life. Who or what is God? What's the origin of evil and suffering? What's the point of the time that we spend on this planet? What happens when we die? Then I went on to explain, in another of those early lectures, that each of the three historical families or groups of religion we'd be studying can be seen as having specialized in addressing one of those big philosophical questions. So in South Asia, it's the question of self. In East Asia, the question of society. And in the West, the question of nature. Well, there's a sense in which the primal religions seek to address all three of those questions simultaneously. Who am I? Who are you? What's the world? The primal answer in each case is basically nothing without the other two. In other words, no me without you and the world, no you without me and the world, and no world without you and me. We need to realize the primal peoples are telling us that self, neighbor, and world are all filaments or threads in a single whole. Put it differently, primal religions, including those of the American Indians, believe that reality is a sort of transaction, I guess I would say. Think about this for a moment in connection with the image in front of you. What's being pictured here? Is it a vase, or is it the profiles of two people looking at each other? Well, it's both, isn't it? It can be either one, depending on how you focus as you look at the image. Neither the vase or the faces is there on the slide until and unless you perceive them as such. So you and your vision are just as necessary as are the lines and the shading on the computer screen. Same thing here. Is that a duck or is that a rabbit? Are those ears or a beak over here on the left? And is this the back of the duck's head or the bunny's nose on the right? Well, again, it could be either one, couldn't it? What something is, the nature of the reality in question, is somewhere between you and the image in front of you. And it depends on the interpretation you give it. Maybe this slide, which I showed you some time ago, will make better sense now. Maybe you'll see a bit more clearly the humor in this and where the perennialist is actually coming from. Anyway, here's my point for today. All reality, primal people would say, is always between, always in the middle. It's always at the intersection between us and other people, as well as between all of us humans in general, on the one hand, and the animals and the plants and the whole of our natural environment on the other hand. And let me add this too, kind of a parenthesis here. This isn't just the view of the Aboriginal and Native American and other primal religions. It's a claim that you actually find among quite a number of theoretical physicists who would also say that what's out there in the world around us, or as the world, are just whirling packets of energy amidst, vast empty space. Packets of energy which they say are in a state of superposition. That's the technical term that they use. Not yet being this or that thing until we, the observers, make them such. Well, this isn't a lecture, I realize, on quantum theory. It's a lecture on a type of religion, so let me cut to the chase. What I'm describing, what I'm trying to give you a feel for in all this, is what I've called in my lecture in Paths of Return, participation, right? Participation. It's what this Native American Chief Seattle, whom I also quoted last time, means here when he says that humankind has not woven the web of life, right? We are but one thread within that web. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. Well, participation, as I've said, is in a sense a summary or a synthesis of the other four characteristic features of the primal religions that we looked at last time. Sacrality, there's no right cleavage break between sacred and profane for the primal people. Everything's sacred. Orality has to do with the oral transmission of teaching, a lack of sacred texts, scriptures, writing. Circularity, primal people's sensitivity to the rotation of seasons and the movements of the day, and how it is that everything comes round and round and round to the start again. And then particularity, their corresponding sensitivity to particular places, things in the natural environment. Well, again, participation, I've said, sort of sums all that up in one word. It has to do with the interpenetration, I've said, between you and the world. I asked the question in Paths of Return, I suggested you ponder the question, where are you? And not, where are you in physical space, in your room or outside or whatever, but where is your sense of yourself inside of you? Where do you point to if you think of yourself? And I said most of us tend to look at our heads or think about our heads, feel like we're inside of our heads in some way. But that's only one way of picturing you. The primal people don't look at things that way. They see themselves and the world as really two sides of one whole. And the self, you, who you are, and the world around you are again just two threads in a common web woven together in a certain way. So whereas we look at things from the outside, as it were, I'm looking maybe out the window, or I'm looking up in the sky, or I'm looking at you if we're talking, and I'm seeing you as something outside of me. Well, the primal person tends to be more, I call it here, an inward participant in the world around him. There's a kind also, participation also has to do with a different dimension as well. It has to do with what I called a kind of horizontal interpenetration, or sympathy, or we could call it a symbiosis between the creatures of nature. Symbiotic relationships, right, are where two or more creatures, animals, live off of each other. They derive sustenance, as it were, from each other. A flea has a symbiotic relationship, I guess, with your dog. But this is deeper than that. It's not just a biological concept. It has to do, again, with all of the creatures, animals, plants, and so forth of nature having this inward connection, one with another. But then also, participation, I said, also has to do with a vertical bond. So that each creature, the primal people believe or feel or have a sensitivity, each creature in some way is linked to a spiritual, well, I call it here a spiritual pattern or a spiritual principle or an archetype. So that for every koala bear, there's a koala bear spirit. For every eagle, there's an eagle spirit, a spiritual pattern or entity or reality or force, as it were, in the heavens, which that animal, that particular animal that you're looking at, in some way is part of and participates in. So that's participation. I gave you this also, way of understanding it maybe as a help here. How we categorize things in the contemporary, whatever, educated modern Western world or whatever is very different from how a primal person will look at things. So we might say, right, that gold and silver are both minerals, a daisy and a lily are both plants, they're both flowers, lion, lamb, both animals, the sun and the moon, well, I guess we don't actually call them planets, but celestial bodies, stuff in the sky. That's how we would categorize. But a primal person might well come to those things and say, no, I'm going to group gold with daisy, with lion, with sun, inasmuch as they all have a kind of radiance about them that's in common, that's similar, a kind of solar aspect, as it were. The sun is solar, right? But if you look at a lion, a male lion with his big mane sort of radiating out from his head that's sort of like sun, or a daisy, the yellowness of the daisy, or the gold of the gold itself. Those are all solar phenomena that we'd categorize, a primal person would categorize together. And then again, silver, lily, lamb, moon, more alike in a lunar way, a silver-like way. And I pointed out that our Taoist friends might say, well, yeah, we kind of look at things that way too. The first are the yang, what I've called here the solar are the yang, and what I've called here the lunar are the yin qualities of the cosmos. Here's yet another way to plug in. And here with this slide, I'm trying to pull together participation and this idea of vertical archetypes with the notion of medicine as we move now toward understanding what medicine and medicine men and women are in the Native American culture in particular. So top of the screen, I've got God, supreme reality, which the Native American Plains Indians call the Great Spirit. I point out with my asterisk, come down, asterisk here, come down here. The name of that being among the Crow people is Akbadadiya. It means something like the high God, or he that hears and sees all. It's another translation of Akbadadiya. And then among the Lakota Sioux people in the Plains Indian group, that great spirit is called Wakantanka. Wakan, I'll come up here, Wakan, double asterisk here, means holy or mysterious, or my phrase in the reading was spiritually charged. So Wakantanka is the big mystery, the big one who's holy, the big spiritually charged source of all charges, as it were. So that's God. All right. And then God, Great Spirit, Akbadadiya Wakantanka, would have, as it were, in itself, all of the spiritual patterns I've mentioned, all the archetypes, as it were, exist within, well, in the West, you might say, within God's mind, within the divine mind. So both solar or yang and lunar or yin archetypes. Now, Wakan, I've tried to picture it here with this box, this green box. This is all a Wakan field, if I could put it that way. There's spiritual energy or a charge, as it were, in that box, and it's being charged up by virtue of these archetypes coming down from the Great Spirit and then penetrating or infusing this field, this Wakan field. All right. Native American medicine, and remember, medicine doesn't mean, pills or Tylenol or aspirin or something like that, cough syrup. We're talking about things which can carry that charge, which can tap into that charge. So I've got my medicine here from the bottom sort of sticking into this field, pulling energy out of that field. The Great Spirit sticks it into the field. Medicine pulls it out of the field. The medicine man is tapping into that field, drawing, as it were, out of it spiritual energy, and then being able to use that energy, this is the claim at least among primal peoples, for the sake of healing and other benefits to the people around him in his tribe, in his group of people. All right, so that leads us to the medicine woman or man or woman. It can be either one, a shaman. A shaman is a medicine man or woman. And I've called that figure, this authoritative spiritual figure among primal peoples, a practitioner of participation. Every primal person, every Native American person, man, woman, child, in a sense, is a participant already, insofar as they construe, feel, sense the cosmos in this interpenetrative way, with them and the world being two sides of one coin. But then there are these shamans, and they are, as it were, experts in not only feeling that connection, but being able to use it, being able to benefit from it and allow others to benefit. The shaman can be a healer, a telepath. So a telepath is somebody who can communicate with somebody else without speaking, just mental communication, telepathic we say, right? He's clairvoyant. Someone who's clairvoyant can see things at a distance, so if you're wherever you are, in Colombia maybe you're aware of something in, Peoria, Illinois. And if you actually know what's going on at a distance like that, without actually being there, you're clairvoyant. A psychopomp, the last blue word on that line, is a spiritual guide. So the shaman, healer, telepath, clairvoyant, and someone who can guide other people into the spiritual world, into the walk-on field, into a relationship with Akbadadia or Wakantanka. The shaman, the medicine woman or man, is also a master of ecstasy, an ecstatic or a master of ecstasy. And as I explained in the reading, ecstasy, the word itself means to stand outside of something, and particularly, especially here, to stand outside of your own body, to exist in some way, to be conscious outside of your body, and to be able to travel. I think I even used the word swim, as it were, for these shamans, outside the boundary, the limits of their physical bodies. Sometimes you may have heard the phrase astral projection. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about astral projection. That's also a phrase that's used for this experience of being outside of your body. So the picture here, I guess somebody's lying in bed asleep, and then their spirit self is sort of hovering over and looking down on their body. Well, I've got 316 in a box there. I told you I would tell you about an experience I had. You may think when I'm done here I'm even stranger than you thought before, but this is true. So I'm in college. This is a number of years ago. I was in college, I think my sophomore year. And I had gone back to my dorm room to have a nap, as I sometimes did in the afternoon. And I fell asleep and had a dream. It was an odd dream. I'm lying in bed, but I wasn't lying in bed in my dream. I was sort of like up in the corner of the room, kind of like where you might have a security camera mounted in a place of business or bank or something. I was looking down on the room from that perspective, and I could see myself lying in the bed, sort of like this person, except I think I was turned over on one side. I could also see next to my bed, kind of like on that table there in this picture, my digital clock. Well, in the dream, the door opens to the room. So I'm dreaming, I'm looking down, the door opens, and my roommate comes in. And again, I'm sort of up in the corner, I'm looking down sort of on his head from that perspective. My roommate comes in, he goes over to his desk across the room, picks up a book, turns around, and walks back out the door. He walks under me, as it were, and I'm looking down on him, and I can see what book he's got. It says chemistry on the spine of the book. And as he exits, I'm also looking kind of down in such a way that I can see that clock on my desk or on the table next to my bed, and it says 3:16. Well, I don't know, the dream stopped or whatever. I fell back into a deeper sleep. I woke up a little bit later, but I could remember the dream, and I thought, well, that's weird. It's kind of a strange thing to happen, but I didn't think too much more about it. Until later on, I guess I met up with my roommate dinner time, and I said to him, no, you didn't come back to the room this afternoon, did you? He said, yes, I did. I said, well, I guess I wasn't there, huh? And he said, well, no, you were there. You were sleeping. And I said, how do you know I was sleeping? Now I'm getting interested. He said, well, you were breathing deeply. I mean, I live with you. I know when you're asleep. You were asleep. I said, okay. Well, why did you come back anyway? You don't usually come back at that time of day. Well, I forgot a book for class. I said, oh, what book was that? What class was that? Chemistry. Now the clincher comes. I said to him, you didn't happen to notice what time it was, did you? And he said, yeah, I actually looked at your clock and it was 3:16 as I left the room. Okay, well, strange things. You could call it coincidence, right? But I, for myself, I can't help but say, yes, it is absolutely possible to be aware of things, to see things, to know things, to have a kind of, I don't know, clairvoyant insight or perspective when you're outside of your body. Because I wasn't in my body. My body was I was looking at my body, for heaven's sakes. So what is that? Well, now again, don't make too much of this. I'm no shaman. But this is a taste, at least, maybe a feeling of what it would be like for these experts in ecstasy to be able to make use of that power, that exiting power, for the sake of other people. Well, here's our specific ecstatic practitioner, our shaman, Thomas Yellowtail. This is the fellow you're reading about. You're reading his words in a book of saints. lived to be 90, 1903, 93 were his dates. He was also the chief of the Sundance of the Crow tribe, and I'll talk about the Sundance rite next time. In the reading, in a book of saints, Yellowtail speaks about 4 main sacred rites, or I've called them here spiritual methods that you find among these Plains Indians. Rites, methods. We could also, I guess if we were Hindus, we would call them margas, paths, ways of accessing and moving closer to Akbadadiya, the Great Spirit. And these are the vision quest, the sweat bath, praying with the pipe, and the sun dance. I'll talk about the bath, the pipe, the dance next time. We're focused on the quest for right now. Just to go over a few things that you read already in Paths of Return. The vision quest is the Native American Indians' search for a kind of word from God, I called it, a kind of personal inspiration or a personal revelation from God. Seeking also medicine. Now really, these are really 2 things in a sense. The inspiration often comes to the Native American on a vision quest in the form of some particular piece of animal fur, or a wing of an animal, or a stone, or a little pine cone or something like that. It often comes in the form of a tangible object. And connected with that, the understanding of the Indian is that God, in a way, has spoken to him through that and revealed something to him. I compared a vision quest to a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or anyone who has a sacred text, a written sacred text, a Bible, a Quran, Vedas, or whatever the text might be. I compared it to someone with a written text like that, opening up their Bible, opening up their sacred book at random, without looking where they were actually opening it up, putting their finger then down on the page, looking at whatever verse it was they were pointing to, and then taking that to be, in a way, God's personal message to them at that point in their lives. People in the Western traditions in particular historically have done that in time of great need, feeling they can't solve a problem and they're trying to figure something out, and they look for God to give them some kind of insight by virtue of this practice. It's called sortilège in French. The other word in blue there is sortilegium, is the Latin equivalent. It means chance reading, literally chance reading. I like to tease sometimes. I say, there was a guy that practiced, the story? The guy who practiced this chance reading of the Bible. And he opened the Bible at random, closed his eyes, put his finger down on the page, and he was pointing to the verse where Judas hanged himself. Judas was the betrayer of Christ, who then in his despair went out and hanged himself. So the guy's finger was pointing at hanged himself. Well, he was pretty sure that couldn't be what God wanted him to do. So he closed the Bible again real quickly and spun it around and closed his eyes and opened up again and put his finger on the page, and it said, "Go and do likewise." So this is just saying this is something you have to be careful with. This is not necessarily always going to give you the results that you'd hoped for. Anyway, it's sort of like that when the Indian goes off on a vision quest. So look at my box down there. The historical religions have sacred books, like the Quran. Those books have chapters. In the case of the Quran, you've heard this term right before, they're called surahs. Each of the surahs, the chapters, have verses. I don't think I used this term before. The Arabic word for verses is ayat. It means literally signs. Okay. The primal peoples, including the Plains Indians, don't have books. They don't have a written language, right? So corresponding to the holy books is nature itself, or herself. As I said last time, the natural environment is the book. The chapters would be 4-legged creatures. So that would be, right, whatever, horses and buffalo and coyotes or whatever. And wingeds would, of course, be the birds. There would also be swimming chapters. They would be the fishes of the rivers and sea. And then coming down, the verses would be a particular 4-legged creature like an otter, or a particular winged like an eagle. And in making contact, you see, with a particular animal, a particular creature, it is as if on the vision quest, the Indian is reading something, is getting a text, quote unquote, a text, as it were, as inspiration from God. Stages of the quest. I talked about this. I'll review this quickly as well with Yellowtail's help. So stage 1, nobody ought to do this, as it were, on their own. The Primal people and the Indians say you need to go and get the permission and blessing of a spiritual elder, the shaman. And the shaman I've compared before to the Hindu guru and the Buddhist roshi and the Sufi sheikh. The equivalent in Christianity would be, the Russian term is starets, or the Greek term is yaranda. And these words also mean an old person, wise in years, who can guide and so forth. Quoting page 122, so right up here at the top, page 122 of a Book of Saints, here's how Yellowtail expresses stage 1. It is necessary to consult a man who's had experience in the sacred ways in order to help a younger man follow the straight path. All men should seek the help of a man who has learned the spiritual ways before they try to do something by themselves. You can better understand spiritual matters after years of following a sacred path. A man must be humble before the great mysteries will grant him anything. A humble man will always ask for guidance from a spiritual man. Then stage 2, after you've been given permission by your spiritual teacher, you would undergo a purification rite, which is in the primal community among the Native Americans a sweat bath. And I'll talk about this in more detail next time. I compared that to the Muslim cleansing the different parts of the body, performing ablution before one of the 5 daily prayers. And it would be analogous to a Christian going to confession, which is also a kind of purification rite, you could say. Stage 3 is going off and actually being on the quest itself, out in nature, for a period traditionally of 3 or 4 days. The Indian on the quest would fast during that period, no food and no liquid for 3 or 4 days. I mean, this is a struggle. They would often be naked, nude, exposing themselves to the elements, and they would often perform some kind of sacrifice. Let me again read from a Book of Saints, pages 119, 120, or where Yellowtail talks about some of this. In the olden days, the man going out to seek his vision would wear a buffalo robe, moccasins, and sometimes a loincloth. When he reached the area of the retreat, so the place that he's actually going to stay for this quest, he removed all of his clothing and almost always was exposed to nature unless he covered himself perhaps with a robe while he slept. I instruct those who ask my advice to follow the traditional way of the old-timers. The vision seeker would go to a place of his own choosing, spend 3 or 4 days upon the hill or high mountains. He would select a place where he wanted to fast. Many, Yellowtail adds, would sacrifice a finger when they got up there. They would chop off the top of their finger and offer it to the Great Spirit or to an animal. If a bird came by and took that piece of finger, then the bird would probably come back after a while and adopt that person, give him medicine, and tell him to go home. So, I mean, this is tough stuff. This is extreme for sure. Especially the sacrificial dimension of perhaps cutting a piece of skin from your arm or a little tip from your finger, and then the fast and exposure to nature. That's the quest itself, during which time the hope, of course, is that you do, in fact, have a visit from one of the wingeds or four-leggeds who will come to you and adopt you and give you some medicine. Stage 4 involves going back to your village, and then having the shaman interpret what has happened. You'll explain the whole thing. Here's what happened. I did this, I did that. And then if you have, in fact, come back with a tooth of an animal or a claw or a piece of skin or a bone or a stone or a little piece of sage, that's what I'm mentioning here on the bottom line, the little things you might come back with, the shaman will instruct you in how to keep those and preserve those and make what's called a medicine bundle. to put your well, I was going to call it a keepsake. It's more than a keepsake. Put your medicine in. Here again from a Book of Saints, page 121. The meaning of the vision must be explained by the medicine man back at home. After the instructor, again that's the medicine man, hears the whole story, he can help explain things to the young man which may not be clear. The medicine man knows what must be done by the recipient of the medicine in order for the recipient to protect the medicine. So, after the young man tells his story, now he's speaking now in the first person, he as a shaman, he, Thomas Yellowtail himself, as a medicine man, and whoever has come back to him for advice, we take a smoke, he says, and we'll be talking about the prayer with a pipe, the peace pipe, and smoking the peace pipe again next time. We take a smoke and say prayers. Then the medicine man tells the young man what he's been given and what he must do. The recipient of the medicine is instructed to make a medicine bundle that will preserve and protect the medicine power. Here on the left is an image, a picture, photo of a crow medicine bundle. The crow themselves, the tribe of the crow, the people of the crow, divide up into different subgroups, and this is the weasel chapter of the crow people, the form of medicine bundle, I guess, that they would traditionally make. And then on the right-hand side, it's a little harder to see this, it's a Native American holding a medicine bundle, or has a medicine bundle actually lying there on the ground in front of him, and he's holding a pipe. We'll talk again more about the pipe next time. All right, in wrapping up the lecture in the reader in Paths of Return, I was trying to anticipate what is not uncommon reaction to hearing some of these things. It's easy to be skeptical, easy to go, this is really strange, this is just weird stuff, how bizarre, you might say. And I said, some people, students I've had, will react and say, well, this ordeal thing, this is just, this is pathological. This is just masochism. This is just somebody delighting in pain, for the sake of the pain itself. Well, maybe, but from the Native American perspective, they flip it around and they look at us and our wish to avoid pain and our, pathological desire to be comfortable all the time, and they go, you're the weird ones. We don't enjoy pain as an end in itself, but we believe very much in heroism and in nobility and in strength of character. And if on a vision quest you're pushing the boundaries, great, that's a good thing to do. You're growing, you're developing strength in that way. So that's why we do that. Somebody might say, again, the critic might say, if you fast for that length of time and go without water and maybe don't sleep very well because you're naked and it's cold outside, of course you're going to have weird, conscious altered states. That's just, kind of what's going to happen. But again, the Native American's going to flip it around and go, well, think about it. All of our states of mind, whatever they are, the state of mind that you're in right now as you're listening to me, is in some way dependent on what you're doing or what you've done to your body, right? I mean, if you don't eat for a long enough time, you will die. And you need to have nutrition. You need to have sleep or whatever to be clear-minded and so on. So they're just saying, we're pushing the boundaries again. We're doing things with our bodies that you might not think are wise, but from experience, centuries, millennia of experience, we've learned we can actually gain insight and clarity and a kind of clairvoyance by pushing to the extreme. And that's what we're doing again on this vision quest. And then dreams. So you have a dream. They talk a lot about dreams in these traditions. The Aborigines in Australia actually have what they call the dream time that they go into. And a cynic, a skeptic might say, well, dreams are just dreams. They're just sort of hallucinations. Nobody should put any stock in a dream. Why think that God speaks in a dream? Akbadadiya is sending an animal to you and is speaking to you in some kind of dream state. That's just nonsense. Well, again, maybe, but I'm pointing out here, I pointed out in the reading, certainly a Christian or a Jew, or a Muslim for that matter. The Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and the Quran both have parallel examples to the one that I'm giving you here from the Christian New Testament, where we know, where the Christian would say, yeah, well, okay, sometimes at least, God does speak, communicate, reveal himself to people in dreams. And a couple of examples here. First of all, in Matthew, we're told that the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife. So Joseph knows now that Mary is pregnant. He knows that he's not the dad. He was minded, the text said earlier, to put her away. But God comes to him in a dream and tells him she's going to give birth to a son, tells him what to name the son, name him Jesus. He's going to save the people from their sins, and so forth and so on here in this text. And then the second passage I have here is Paul, 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul talks about knowing a man who was taken up into paradise. Now he puts this as though it's somebody he was acquainted with, somebody else that he knew. Scholars of the New Testament are pretty sure that it's actually Paul that Paul's talking about. And he's just trying to be, I guess, humble about it or deferential about it, not claiming he's trying to hide, as it were, what happened to himself. But it doesn't make any difference. Was it he or somebody else? But somebody was taken up into paradise. Now notice, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knows. And this person in that state heard unspeakable words. This is back to ineffability again, isn't it? Mystery and mysticism and so forth. But what I was accentuating here is the experience was perhaps out of the body. So that would be an ecstatic experience, perhaps had by St. Paul himself. So, maybe there are parallels. Maybe there are reasons behind this, even though this may strike you as odd to begin with. Well, and then finally, I said, at the end of the lecture you read, somebody might say to me, okay, Dr. Cutzinger, but what about these little people and these medicine fathers that Yellowtail talks about? Now, that's just too much, isn't it? Surely they're nothing more than whatever, the Plains Indian equivalents of the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. So I said I would tell you about White Goose, and I'll finish with this. White Goose, it seems, was one of Yellowtail's most important spirit friends. Okay, I'll just put it that way. At some point, on a vision quest of his own in his youth, the bird, the goose, had apparently adopted him and given him one of its feathers, which he kept in his own medicine bundle, of course. And he would use the feather in healing ceremonies that he conducted from time to time. And I'll tell you more about one of those healings that I witnessed myself in my next YouTube presentation. Well, anyway, a very close friend of mine told me about one time when he was traveling with Yellowtail in Montana. My friend was sitting in the back seat of a car with the shaman, with Yellowtail, heading down the interstate on the way to a Crow Indian healing ceremony that evening. And you know how it is on long trips. You get sort of bored. And in his boredom, my friend was just sort of looking up at the sky, and he happened to see a bird, a white bird, maybe 200 or 300 feet above the car in the air, sort of flying along with the car. And my friend told me, he said he didn't think too much about this until a few minutes later, and he looked up again, and there was the same bird, and it was still following the car. Now my friend was interested, and he kept watching, and he said every time the road would curve, the bird would curve to stay with it. Well, Yellowtail had apparently been asleep all this time, but my friend couldn't contain his curiosity, so he gave him a nudge and woke him up, and he pointed up at the sky and asked, what was going on. And Yellowtail, my friend said, looked out the window, peered up in the air, and then with kind of a bored expression on his face, simply said, "Oh, that's White Goose. He knows I'll be needing him tonight." And with that, Yellowtail promptly fell back asleep. Well, sure enough, that evening, my friend said, somebody came forward to be healed of some illness. And in order to help the person, Yellowtail selected a white goose feather from his medicine bundle as the appropriate medicine. All right, I mean, I wasn't in the car. I didn't see this myself. I realize what I'm telling you is secondhand, and for you it's now third hand. But it does give you pause, doesn't it? It's really a much stranger universe than most of us supposedly educated contemporary Americans think.